The 1960s. Now, I see a few of you that actually might remember some of the 60s and some of the 70s. So I'm not by myself, but the 60s were a rather wild time here in the United States. Many things happened, but Yuri Gagarin, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, was the first man in space. Cuban Missile Crisis right off of our shore. The JFK assassination in 63, along with the Civil Rights March in B.C. 65, we have U.S. troops in Vietnam. In 67, you have the Arab-Israeli 7-Day War. 68, Dr. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy are both assassinated. Also in 68, you have Epperson versus Arkansas. And in 69, we had Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, setting foot on the moon. And to cap it all off, they had a big old party called Woodstock. And that rounded out our 60s. Are you familiar with all these events, most of you? Epperson in Arkansas. I'm so glad you asked. What is this green one here? Any ideas?
I hope that it deals with switch over from the changing intelligence design to mandated evolution teaching in public schools.
Man, you are on it today, brother. You are on it today. So in 1969, the state of Arkansas said, look, we don't want to be forced to teach this new evolution theory. We want to continue to teach creation. But the Supreme Court ruled in favor and said this is what needs to happen. And because it was the Supreme Court of the United States, it set the precedence that you can't use religion to determine what's going to be taught in the school. So, at that point, we had the advent of what is called evolution in our schools. This is why we need to do apologetics. Because we talked about what apologetics is, but the purpose of apologetics is a threefold purpose. The first part of apologetics, number one, is for edification. Okay, I know I'm saved because I had an experience with the God of heaven and earth. Right? I don't need apologetics to tell me whether or not I'm saved or not. But there are times when I begin to struggle and wonder about whether I start to wrestle with some very difficult questions that maybe atheists or people of other faith are giving me. So I begin to search for, is it reasonable, is it rational for me to even believe in this God of heaven and earth? Is it reasonable for me to believe that Jesus is the right version of this God? This is what apologetics is about. Number two, it's about helping others come for evangelism. Right? Because regardless of what you're going to believe, there's a point where you need to actually cross a bridge that you can't see. You're going to need to take a step of faith. But faith isn't blind wishing and just hoping and just throwing yourself off a cliff. Okay? Biblical faith is placing your trust in what you have good evidence and reasons to believe is true. You may not necessarily be able to see the exact answer, but evidence and reasons can get you close enough to say, you know what, I'm going to put my faith in that. That seems like the best bet. The third reason for apologetics is culture. It's culture. It's to affect those that are around you. It's to speak in a way that's moral. To align people's hearts and minds with truth. Our world right now is awash with mental relativism, right? If I don't feel like being a guy today, I can throw on some heels and some lipsticks and I can suddenly be a girl and force you all to call me by my new name. Force you to participate in my reality. If I want to be a potted plant, okay, I can force you to participate in my reality. Okay, this is the world in which we live in. This is what apologetic does. Apologetics gives us the ability to speak clarity, truth, logic, and reason to a culture that desperately needs it. So, here we are. Anybody recognize this guy? Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is the one who gave us this book, entitled The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or, the other title, The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. This is apologetics. This is why it's needed. Interestingly enough, that the story doesn't start with Charles Darwin. He studied under another gentleman by the name of Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a biologist and a scientist. And the way that he taught Charles Darwin to study has implications. One of the things that Charles Lyell said was that the present is the key to the past. What does that mean? The present is the key to the past. He says, as a biologist, when you're looking at what happened in the past, you need to be able to look at what's happening now. What do you see in the world now? Because the best explanation for an event in the remote past is a cause. Okay? The best explanation for an event in the past is a cause, but not just any cause. It has to be a cause that we know from our experience that has the capacity to produce that effect. Okay? If I'm going to link something together, I have to look at what happens in the natural world and say, okay, well, X happened. What's capable of producing X? Oh, I see X happening over here. Hey, the number 3 produced X. Okay, so it's reasonable for me to think that 3 produced X in the past. This is how he guides. He said that our present experience of cause and effect should guide our explanation. So, let's consider Charles Darwin. How do we define evolution? If you to throw out some things, what are the things that define evolution? Natural selection. Yep, I like that. What else? It is, in fact, a process. What else about the process? Yeah, it can start with simple to more complex forms of life. Yeah, those are all good things. Let's jump in. I'm going to give you 3 things. Common descent, random mutation, and natural selection. So Charles Darwin is doing what Charles Lyell taught him to do. He's looking at these animals and he's saying, I'm looking at these mammals here and I see a common form. They're symmetrical beings. Yeah, they have hair, they have a spine, they're able to regulate their body temperature. They feed their babies with milk. You know what? There's common infrastructure in all these creatures. So what I think it is, I think they descended from a common ancestor. And that's what he ran with. Now, we got a common ancestor, but how did we get from maybe squirrels to maybe cats? How did we get there? He goes, well, I think what we got there is by random mutations. Because squirrels kind of are like cats, but if a few of their genes, if they had a mutation and a few of their genes changed, they could suddenly maybe start presenting some new characteristics. So it makes sense to me, it makes sense to Charles Darwin, that random mutations could account for various life forms. So he ran with that. But we have some creatures that are here and some that aren't here. So what did he say? Well, what I see in the wild, I see the big hunting the small. And I think if these creatures adapted well, maybe the fittest ones will survive. So these are the 3 legs on which evolution stands. Number 1, common descent. Number 2, random mutations. And number 3, natural selection. Fair enough so far? Okay. Well, we're back to Lyell. Well, how did he do? Lyell says our present cause is capable of producing... What present cause is capable of producing this effect? What present cause is capable of producing this huge order of plant and animal life that we had in our kingdom? Is Darwinian evolution capable of doing that? Well, our schools teach it. Correct? Our schools are still teaching it now. Well, there are some gentlemen that disagree. And the first of them is Dr. Michael Behe. These are a couple books, if you're at all interested in this subject, are powerful books. Dr. Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. And he's a professor of biological sciences at Lee University in Pennsylvania. But he's also a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. Right? And he says in his book himself, he said, for the Darwinian theory of evolution to be true, it has to account for the molecular structure of life. It is the purpose of this book to show that it does not. So what is he saying? He's saying that recent scientific discoveries at a molecular level, right? So you have atoms, okay, kind of the building blocks of all substances. Atoms come together and they form molecules. But he's saying that when we look at life, plant and animal life, we see things going on at that molecular level that can't be explained by Darwinian evolution. Fantastic book. It's not a super hard read, but it's a great book to jump into. Probably my favorite instructor is Dr. Stephen Meyer. Now, Dr. Stephen Meyer has a PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University. He was a before he did that, he was a doctorate level geophysicist. Okay? This dude's like mad smart. All right? But now, he's a college professor, but he's also the director now for the Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture. In my opinion, Dr. Meyer is the tip of the spear when it comes to this new area called intelligent design. Intelligent design. So when we talk about intelligent design, let me go over his books too, by the way. Darwin's Doubt, fantastic book. Okay, a little bit higher level than Behe's, but it's a fantastic book, and it talks about what's called the Cambrian explosion. So how many of you seen Jurassic Park? Okay, so the Jurassic Park was an area, a region of time in which these various creatures lived. Well, during the Cambrian period, we had this massive explosion. Suddenly, we had all of these different type of microscopic animals. They said, well, how can random mutations have done that? Is it even possible? It doesn't seem that's possible. He talks about the Cambrian explosion. But his next book, Signature in the Cell, is a powerful book. It outlines what happened in 1953 when Watson and Crick elucidated the DNA, the structure of DNA, how they did it. It's a fascinating story, but even Crick, how many know that Crick was a World War II code breaker? That was his job in World War II, was to break code. So these two guys were like they were like a Duck Dynasty guys rolling into the Yale and Harvard and all these institutions. They're laughing at these guys. They're like, they'll never find it. We're close. But these are the guys that cracked the case. So he talks about how they went about doing that and how the prior experiences that they had and their understanding of information and biology together led them to be able to do what they did and discover DNA. But that's what they did. So two very, very good books to read. Now, intelligent design. Well, we know what intelligent is, right? Intelligence just means you're smart. You got a mind. You can actually think. But what do we mean when we say design? What is design? How would you define design? Instructions? Information with a purpose? I like it. A design. What is a design? Any ideas? A plan. Yeah, a plan. Well, when in doubt, I go to Webster's 1828 dictionary because it hasn't been corrupted too much. But part 1, design. A plan. Look at that. Or a representation of a thing by an outline, a sketch, a general view, a first idea represented by visible lines. How about a scheme or a plan in the what? The mind. A wise man is distinguished by the judiciousness of his designs. A purpose, intention, an aim, implying a scheme or a plan in the mind. It's my design to educate my son for the bar. All right, not bar like Whiskey Beach Pub. All right, but the bar like the what attorneys have to take, right? But it's dealing with the mind again, isn't it? the idea or a scheme intended to be expressed by an artist as the designs of metals. Interesting. So we know what design is. We know where design comes from. It has to come from an intelligent source, doesn't it? It always does. But how can we tell? How do we know that something is designed? We can look at something. Is there a way we can tell? If it looks different, you're onto something there. If it looks different from what? Man, you need to be up here teaching. You're exactly right. A design is going to look different from something that occurs naturally or randomly, doesn't it? Let me ask you. This is the Atacama Desert in Chile. Is this rock formation designed or is it natural? Votes for natural? Any votes for designed? Okay. How about this rock formation in the Giza Plain in Egypt? Natural or design? Okay. Wait a minute. You claim it's design, but who put the peak, who put the highest rock on the highest pyramid? Who was the person who did that? But who? Who was it? You don't know? See, this is one of the arguments that atheists will use for life. If you can't point me to who did it and how they did it, your theory doesn't hold water. But that's a logical fallacy. Because we don't know who the person was that put that highest stone on the top doesn't mean that this was not designed, was it? Logical fallacy. This is a rock formation in the Black Hills near Keystone, South Dakota. Old picture. Is this rock formation natural or designed? Yeah. We got natural for a minute, don't we? But we zoom in a bit. Is this rock formation natural or designed? Yeah. How can we tell if something is designed? We can see if something is designed by its effects. By its effects. If it has the ability to carry information. We can see that. We can see that nature is capable of doing certain smaller, random things. But it is not capable of communication. So, when we're talking about intelligent design, we're talking principally about two things. We're talking, one, irreducible complexity. And number two, we'll talk about specified complexity. First is irreducible. The second is specified. All right? I'm going to go to one of my favorite things in the world. The internal combustion engine. This is a V8 engine. Now, we as people, if we want to move forward and we want to move forward quicker than our legs will carry us, we design things to help us move. This is an internal combustion engine, but it is irreducibly complex. That means it is complex in a way that if you try to reduce it by any part, it's not going to work. So you can see in this engine here, we've got pistons, we've got camshafts, we've got crankshaft, we've got valves. But if I walk in there and I pull out the pistons, and they aren't there, is the engine going to work? If I yank out a camshaft or a crankshaft, is it going to work? No, it's not going to work. Why? Because it's complex and you can't reduce it. So do you understand irreducible complexity? It can't evolve. Could it have evolved pistons first, and then maybe grew a camshaft? Well, no, because the whole operation has to be present in order for the engine to work. This is an example of irreducible complexity. And powerful. But what if I want to go real fast? Well, that first engine you saw, it generates about 300 horsepower. This engine here, this one generates about 20,000 horsepower. And this crankshaft that comes out of the engine, in order to produce that, it's been well and thoroughly designed. It spins at 10,000 RPM to propel that dragster down the road. 10,000 RPM. This is designed, ladies and gentlemen. But we can look at another motor. Remember that number. Everybody say 10,000. 10,000, okay? We can look at another motor. You know what this is? Get your mind out of here. It's not a sperm, it's an E. coli. It's a bacterial E. coli. And it has 4 flagella, I would say. Flagella. This bacteria contains 20 proteins total, 40 genes. But the most complex organ in this bacteria is its motor. Its motor that's capable. Wait, what was the RPM on the dragster? 10,000? What do you think? E. coli. Come on, clicker. Oh, the clicker died. It's not. There we are. 100,000. That dragster is clearly designed. It takes all of our best knowledge, all of our best effort to get that thing to go down the track without blowing its engine. This guy right here, E. coli, no problem, man. Its flagellum spin at 100,000 RPM. It can ramp up to that speed in a fraction of a second, not even 1 second. And in less than 1 second, it can completely reverse the speed of that engine. You don't see what that engine looks like? Oh, this is what that engine looks like. How about that? How about that? Random mutations, says Darwin. Is that designed? Or did that just happen? Look at the beauty and the architecture of that thing. The stators, the rotors. It's unbelievable. See, you know, the U.S. Navy has been studying this thing for years, trying to figure out how they can propel submarines quietly using something like this. They're not even close. Not even close. So, we get a little farther in Dr. Meyer's book regarding DNA. And we're going to move from irreducible complexity. So, but do you see that motor that we showed back there a minute ago? Do you see how that's irreducibly complex? There's no component that we can pull out of that motor and have it run properly. It could not have evolved piece by piece to get there. It's just not possible. All the pieces have to be present in order for it to move. So, let's look at specified complexity. Specified complexity. What is that? Well, we look at DNA. This is going to give us a little bit more insight when we look at it. My clicker's just not working, so I'm going to do it with my hand here. We ask ourselves, we know that DNA carries our genetic code. But what's the origin of the digital information that's stored within DNA? And yes, it is in fact digital information. Let's take a look. This is the DNA structure. There's 2 sugar phosphate backbones that run down the side of the ladder. So it's like a ladder that's been twisted, right? Sugar phosphate backbones on either side. And inside, we have paired off proteins. Adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. The green always goes with the yellow. The blue always goes with the yellow, and the green always goes with the orange. Right? That's not their real colors, but for the graph, you can see what the colors are. So what we have is the build-out of a code, and you can see a string of code there on the bottom right-hand side. I'm not going to go into RNA below it, but you can see the DNA above. Now, again, 1953, and they realized that this is actually a 4-digit code. We use A, T, G, and C. We have an alphabet, but our alphabet has 26 letters. that we use to express ourselves in the form of words. We see that DNA carries information, but let's look a little bit deeper on what it means to be actually information. What information is there? This gentleman, Claude Edward Shannon, he was an American mathematician, electrical engineer, and a cryptographer, and he was also the father of modern information theory. Brilliant, brilliant dude. Okay? What he was trying to do is he was trying to form a method to show exactly how much information could be contained in any type of medium. And he came across this theory. He said, I think what information is, well, we can measure the strength of information by its ability to reduce uncertainty. And they're like, what? Okay. The ability to reduce uncertainty. We're going to get to that in a minute. But what is information? Information, very simply, it's the attribute inherent and communicated by alternating sequences or arrangements of something. It could be dots and dashes like Morse code. It could be symbols like Egyptian hieroglyphs. It could be symbols like in our alphabet. But it produces a certain effect. And we can measure information by its power to reduce uncertainty, things we don't know. I'm going to give you a very simple example about it. If we're getting ready to start a football game, and we want to determine who gets the ball first. So we're uncertain as to which team is going to take the opportunity to go with the ball, to kick, or to receive. So we're uncertain. We don't know which way it's going to be. We can break that uncertainty with a piece of information. What do? We flip a coin. So a coin has a capacity to reduce uncertainty, doesn't it? So how much uncertainty do I reduce when I flip a coin? 50%, right? So does a coin carry a lot of power, informational power? Not really, does it? Because you got a choice. It's either heads or tails. It can reduce 50% of the information. What might be a better medium to reduce information? Have you ever played Monopoly? Dice, yeah. How about if we roll a die? Because a die has 6 sides. And when it rolls and it comes up 4, well, we just reduced 5 out of 6 sides. We just reduced 83% of uncertainty. So a die, it has more power, doesn't it, than a coin. Do you see where this is going? If I told you that somewhere out on the beach in Brevard County is a buried treasure, well, you'd be like, oh, okay. Right? You have a huge amount of uncertainty. What do you need? You need better information, don't you? You need better information. But, if I said it's at 28 degrees, 22 minutes, and 1.4 seconds north by 7.6, you might end up having a little better luck, wouldn't you? Right, because I reduced all the uncertainty. Literally every 2-foot square of sand on the beach in Brevard County except this one. So that bit of information that I gave you was extremely powerful. Okay? Now, consider the string of letters. The string of letters is what's called Shannon information. It has the ability to carry information. This random string of letters. It's not like A, B, A, B, A, B. Okay, it's got randomness to it. And it's also got a lot of letters. It could say something, maybe if it was encoded and I had a code key. But it's just basic, not useful Shannon information. But consider the second string of letters. This is specified information. Specified information. Do you see the difference? I can take that specified information and I can go do something. It has value. It has communicative value in it. So it's one thing to have Shannon information, random information. It's another thing to have specified information. So does this make sense where we're going with this? The difference between the various types of information. Okay. Well, oh yeah, I didn't go to the next slide. What about DNA? Would DNA have Shannon information in it or specified information? You are correct, but it also has Shannon information. Okay? It has code. It has the ability, an incredible ability, to pass information forward. But it also has specified information in that it directs processes. It causes us to grow. It programs all of the micro machines that are required to build more DNA, to split DNA, to replicate it, to spool it up in spools called chromosomes and send it aside. You lose about 80 billion cells a day, 80 million cells a day. And those cells have to be replaced. Blood cells, skin cells. Your body is constantly doing this. But there needs to be an architect, there needs to be a plan where it says, oh, I know it goes there, a bone cell goes there. Oh, a hair follicle goes there, a skin cell goes there. There has to be a plan to do that. And that plan is contained within our genetic code. So, it's both. Now, understand this. Our genetic code, they've mapped, how many know they've fully mapped the human genome? Right? They got markers where everything goes. They don't know what everything does. They don't know what all the various types of proteins, complexes do. Some of them they do, but they've mapped it. So it's 3.2 billion pairs long. That's you. 3.2 billion pairs. That's so big that if I was to write it out, one letter a second, without sleeping or eating, it would take me 101 years to write out who you are, a letter at a time. That's only, and arguably you could say it's not 3.2, it's actually 6.4 because they're pairs. Right? The A is always connected to the T and the C is always connected to the G. 101 years to write that out. Do you think that has the capacity to carry some information? Without question. Without question. So, what do our atheist friends say about our genetic code? Here's Richard Dawkins. He said the machine code of genes is uncannily computer-like. Well, why don't we ask somebody that knows maybe a little bit more about computers? You know this guy? Bill Gates? He says DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Ever created. So let's go back to Charles Lyell, Darwin's professor. Based on what we know about DNA, do you think that Darwinian evolution is still the best explanation for what we see? Because he's going to ask us, I agree, because he's going to say, hey, our present experience of cause and effect should guide our explanation. So when we see specified information in our world, we should be able to refer back to maybe where this DNA thing came from. Let's look. If we look and we see Morse code, where'd the Morse code come from? It came from a guy named Morse, who had a head, who had a brain, and said, you know, I think this is a way to transmit, to communicate over wireless by beeps. If we have the code of Hammurabi, if we have Egyptian scriptures, if we have the Rosetta Stone, if we have computers communicate on a binary code, right? Computers only talk with ones and zeros. And we can do some pretty cool stuff with computers, right? With ones and zeros. Only 2 digits. Our genetic code starts with 4. Okay, that's a logarithmic increase in its ability to carry information. This is why Bill Gates said it's what we see going on in our bodies is far beyond anything that we see in the computer world. So what do we know about every one of these forms of specified communication, of specified information? They all come from an intelligent source. Right? Full stop. So, if I'm going to do what Charles Lyell said, I'm going to look at where I see specified information, and I say it has to come from an intelligent mind. Our uniform and repeated experience demands that. Now, interestingly enough, Charles Darwin, he wrote this in his book. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not have possibly been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find out no such case. So, let me ask you, Charles Darwin, was his theory bad? I don't think his theory was bad at the time, based on what he knew. Because with Charles Darwin, the microscopes that they had then, they could look at cells, but they just looked like Legos, like black boxes. That's where Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, came from. He just thought, they're just little blocks that we assembled together, and maybe if I twist a couple blocks, I'm going to get a different life form. He couldn't see what was going on inside the cellular wall. Right? He couldn't see the mitochondria or the nucleus and the fission that's going on within the nucleus or the chromosomes, right? Splitting and dividing, how these things are happening. He can't see that. He couldn't look at the motor in an E. coli and see all of these parts that existed in order to propel this one single-celled organism forward. But he says here, hey, if there comes a time when you can show that this doesn't make sense, then my theory breaks down. Well, guess what? The wheels has fallen off his cart a long time ago. And yet they're still pushing Darwinian evolution. They're trying to figure out a way around it. They're still pushing it. See, what Darwin can explain is what he calls the survival of the fittest. What he cannot explain is what I call the arrival of the fittest. For Darwin's theory of general evolution to work, he starts with life and the fact that life exists. But his theory is woefully inept to explain the origins of life. Where did life come from? He has to steal from us in order to even start. I'm started with life. No, you got to go through your own life, buddy. Then you can talk about how this goes forward. Right? Now, when we talk about creation, as Christians, the creation account, there are lots of theological opinions on it. Okay, how did God do it? When did He do it? Did He do these things literally or figuratively? We have all kinds of arguments, but one of the basic things that we miss is with regards to information. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was what? Without form. And it was what? Void. The earth was without form and void. If we would have been standing outside and looking at the initial creation event, and we see the earth, and we see the heavens, we're looking at this going, what's this? What is that? An incredible deal of uncertainty. What's going to happen? There's nothing there. But what did God do? Then God said, let there be light. And I believe this is all light. When you look at the forces, the fundamental forces, the forces of nature, right? You got the strong and the weak nuclear forces. You got gravitational force. You got electromagnetism, light, and radiation. You got all these things suddenly happened at the creation event. God said, let there be light. God used what? Words, didn't He? He used words to create. Look what He's doing. Then He said, let there be a firmament in the water. Then He said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered. Then He said, let the earth bring forth clouds. Then He said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven. He said. Creation, all of creation, was God infusing our reality with with specified information, with the capacity to do things that were good. Every time He got done, He said, that's good. That's good. That's good. When He created mankind, what did He say? That was very good. Very good. Because we're created in the image and likeness of God. He's given us a name. And our name is written in a 4-digit genetic code. That's what He's given us. What He's given us is sacred. Do you understand that how tall you are, how short you are, is sacred? Because it's how God designed it. The color of your eyes, the color of your skin, the color of your hair. Okay? Are you built like a sumo wrestler or a high jumper? It's sacred. It's done according to His design. Whether you have an X and an X chromosome, or whether you have an X and a Y chromosome, is sacred. It's done according to God's design. That's the beauty of it. You are created in the image and likeness of God. Ladies, you are uniquely able to carry certain attributes of God that we can't carry. We as men are uniquely able to carry certain attributes of God that you can't carry. But together, as men and women, we can reflect the nature of God Himself. Our sexuality is sacred. It's not up for vote or opinion. And no matter how you may choose to mutilate your body, every cell in your body will still continue to scream XX if you're female, XY if you're male. It's sacred. The same with abortion. There's a human being that's growing inside of you. That human being is sacred. Why? It has a name. It has its own genetic code. From the moment of fertilization, that genetic code is formed. And that little human being is not developed, but it is a human being. It has all the capacity to do the things that life does. So the argument always comes back to, what is it that's growing there? I'll tell you what it is that's growing there. It's an image bearer of God with a sacred name. That's in fact who you are. We also see information a little later on when John talks about creation. Go one more further here. John 1:1. In the beginning was the what? Holy cow. The Word of God. The Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. When they're talking about the Word, they're talking Jesus Christ. He's the very expression of who God is in the natural realm. He is truth. He is life. He's God Himself. All things were made through Him. Through who? Jesus Christ. The Word of God. All things were made through Him. And without Him was nothing made that was made. In Him was what? Life. Life was in the Word of God. The specified communication that came from a divine mind has the ability to infuse the entire reality with life. Wow. And the light was the light of men, and the light shined in the darkness, but the darkness did not comprehend it. Some of us comprehend it now a little bit better now, right? Hopefully. But there's still those that don't. Well, this Word, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace, and full of truth.